Today, we're re-looking back at 15 strict school rules from the 1960s that might make you thankful you didn't, till you have to live through them. Grab your notebook and sharpen that pencil. It's time for class. 1. No talking without permission. Back then, classrooms were quiet. Painfully quiet. If a student spoke without being called on, it wasn't he just frowned upon. It could mean staying after school or even getting a note sent home. Teachers believed silence meant respect, and order was more important than creativity. Today we call it class participation. In the 60s, it was talking back. 2. The paddle was the law. Corporal punishment wasn't just allowed, it was expected. A wooden paddle hung proudly behind many teachers' desks. One loud whisper or a late assignment could earn a quick trip to the hallway for discipline. It sounds harsh today, but many parents supported it back then. Spare the rod, spoil the child wasn't just a saying, it was a school policy. 3. Dress codes were serious business. For boys, that meant collared shirts and polished shoes. For girls, knee-length skirts and absolutely no pants, even in winter. Some schools measured skirt lengths with rulers. The idea was to teach decency and discipline, but to modern eyes it looks more like a battle between fabric and freedom. 4. Standing when the teacher enters every morning began the same way. The teacher stepped into the room, and every student stood up. It was a gesture of respect, rooted in military-style order. Students waited silently until the teacher said, "You may sit." It might seem old-fashioned, but in the 1960s, respect wasn't just encouraged, it was rehearsed daily. 5. No left-handed writing allowed. If you were left-handed, life at school could be rough. Teachers often forced students to switch hands, believing left-handedness was incorrect or even rebellious. Some kids were made to tie their left hand behind their back while writing. Thankfully, by the 1970s, science and common sense began to take over superstition. 6. Girls couldn't take shop class, woodworking, metalwork, and auto repair. That was for boys. Girls were sent to home economics instead, where they learned sewing, cooking, and how to be a good homemaker. Schools truly believed they were preparing students for life, but their idea of life was stuck in the 1950s. 7. Boys couldn't take home EC, and it worked both ways. A boy who wanted to learn how to cook or sew, that would raise eyebrows. Gender roles were drawn in ink, and stepping outside them just wasn't done. It took decades before schools allowed every student to pick their own path, no matter their gender. 8. No gum, no candy, no exceptions. Chewing gum was considered a public crime in schools. Teachers said it was messy, distracting, and rude. Some would even make students spit it into a tissue and stick it on their nose for the rest of class. Harsh, maybe, but for many teachers, gum was the symbol of a rebellious generation. 9. Hair rules for everyone. In many schools, long hair on boys was banned. Barbershop cuts only. Anything else meant detention or suspension. For girls, hair had to be tidy and often tied back. When the Beatles hit the scene in the mid-60s, schools went into a panic. A little too much hair suddenly meant a whole lot of trouble. 10. No public displays of affection, holding hands in the hallway? Absolutely not. Dating was something you did outside school, and even then it was whispered about. Teachers and principals kept a sharp eye out for inappropriate behavior. A simple note saying, "Do you like me?" could land you in serious trouble. 11. Standing for the pledge every morning. Before the first bell, every student stood facing the flag. Hand over heart, eyes on the stars and stripes. The Pledge of Allegiance wasn't optional, it was a daily ritual. It created a sense of unity, but for some students, especially during the turbulent 1960s, it also sparked quiet rebellion. 12. No talking about politics or war. The 1960s were a decade of protest, but not inside the classroom. Schools often banned students from discussing civil rights, Vietnam, or even the president. Teachers feared disruption. The goal was to keep students focused on math and grammar, but silence couldn't stop curiosity. By the late 60s, students began speaking up anyway. 13. Church before school. In many small towns, the school day began with prayer or a Bible reading. It was seen as normal, even patriotic. But as America grew more diverse, these practices started to fade. In 1962, a Supreme Court ruling ended mandatory school prayer, and classrooms across the country quietly changed forever. 14. Strict gender seating. Some schools had boys on one side, girls on the other, no mixing allowed. It was meant to prevent distraction, but it also reflected how differently boys and girls were treated. It's strange to imagine now, but in those days, even where you sat said something about who you were allowed to be. 15. No speaking your mind. Perhaps the most powerful rule of all: keep opinions to yourself. Whether it was about teachers, the rules, or the world outside, students were taught to obey, not to question. But that changed by the end of the decade, when young voices began to rise. The kids who once sat in silence became the generation that changed everything. Looking back, these rules might seem strange, even unfair, but they shaped a generation. The classrooms of the 1960s were strict, structured, and built on respect. And while many of those rules have faded, the lessons about discipline, fairness, and finding your own voice still echo today. If this trip down memory lane brought back a few memories, give this video a like, share it with someone who went to school in the 60s, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from America's past. Because sometimes the best way to understand today is to rewind yesterday.